The year is 793 AD. The morning mist hangs heavy over the small island of Lindisfarne off the northeastern coast of England. Monks walk peacefully between stone buildings, beginning their daily prayers. They have no idea that their world is about to change forever. On the horizon, strange ships appear. Their curved wooden hulls cut through the cold waters. Dragon heads rise from their bows. Oars move in perfect rhythm. The monks watch in confusion, then in terror. Within hours, the monastery burns. Gold is stolen. Blood stains the sacred ground. This was not just an attack. This was a message. The Vikings had arrived. Welcome to Zodiak. I am your host, and today we journey back over 1,000 years to explore one of history's most fascinating civilizations, the Vikings. They were warriors, they were explorers, they were traders, farmers, poets, and kings. For nearly 300 years, they shaped the course of European history. They reached places no Europeans had ever seen. They built kingdoms that still exist today. But who were they really? Beyond the myths and legends, what was the truth about these northern warriors? In the next 40 minutes, we will uncover their origins, their beliefs, their greatest achievements, and their ultimate fate. This is the complete story of the Vikings. Let us begin. To understand the Vikings, we must first understand their homeland, Scandinavia, the land of the midnight sun, a region of dramatic contrasts. In the north, endless winter nights and summers where the sun never sets, mountains covered in snow, deep fjords carved by ancient glaciers, forests so thick that light barely reaches the ground. This was a hard land, a beautiful land, but a land that demanded strength from its people. The term Viking itself is debated by historians. Some believe it comes from the Old Norse word vik, meaning bay or inlet. Others connect it to the word vikinger, meaning pirate or raider. But here is something important. Not all Scandinavians were Vikings. The word originally referred specifically to those who went on overseas expeditions. A farmer who stayed home was not a Viking, but that same farmer, if he joined a raiding party, became one. The people we call Vikings today came from three main regions. First, the Danes from modern-day Denmark. They were among the most organized and would later form powerful kingdoms. Second, the Norwegians from the mountainous western coast. Limited farmland pushed many of them to seek fortune overseas. Third, the Swedes from the eastern regions. They often traveled east into Russia and beyond. These three groups shared language, culture, and gods, but they were not unified. They fought among themselves as often as they raided foreign shores. Now, a crucial question. Why did the Viking Age begin when it did? Several factors came together in the late 700s. First, population growth. Scandinavian communities were expanding. The limited farmland could not support everyone. Younger sons, who would not inherit family farms, needed other paths to wealth and status. Second, advances in shipbuilding. The Scandinavians had perfected a revolutionary design. The longship, light enough to sail up shallow rivers, strong enough to cross open oceans, fast enough to strike before enemies could prepare. Third, opportunity. Europe at this time was divided and wealthy. Monasteries held gold and silver with almost no defenses. Kingdoms were weak and fragmented. Fourth, and this is often overlooked, a culture that celebrated adventure. In Norse society, a man's reputation was everything. Fame gained through brave deeds would live forever. Death in battle was not feared, it was honored. The stage was set.
The dragons would soon take flight.
Let us return to Lindisfarne, that fateful day in 793. The attack shocked Christian Europe. A scholar named Alcuin wrote that never before had such terror appeared in Britain. He saw it as divine punishment. But this was only the beginning. In the years that followed, Viking raids spread like wildfire. Ireland felt their fury. Monasteries burned from coast to coast. The Vikings discovered that Irish religious sites held incredible wealth: gold crosses, silver chalices, jeweled book covers. They also discovered something else. Slaves were valuable. Irish men, women, and children were captured and sold in markets across Europe and the Middle East. France suffered next. In 845, a Viking fleet of over 100 ships sailed up the Seine River. Paris, the great city, lay before them. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, faced a terrible choice. His army could not stop the invaders, so he paid them 7,000 pounds of silver. This payment had a name: Danegeld, Dane gold. It was meant to buy peace. Instead, it taught the Vikings that terror was profitable. They returned again and again. But the raids were not just about wealth. They were about honor and reputation. In Norse culture, a leader proved himself through successful raids. He shared the plunder with his warriors, earning their loyalty. A generous leader attracted more followers. More followers meant larger raids. Larger raids meant more wealth. It was a cycle of violence and reward. The weapons of the Vikings became legendary. The sword was the most prized. A good blade, often imported from Frankish blacksmiths, was a treasure passed through generations. Warriors gave their swords names. They believed the weapons held power. The axe was more common, cheaper to make, but deadly in skilled hands. The Danes particularly favored large, two-handed axes that could split shields and armor alike. The spear was the weapon of the ordinary warrior, simple, effective, and versatile. And then there was the shield, round, wooden, painted in bright colors. A wall of shields locked together was the foundation of Viking battle tactics. They called it the shield wall. But perhaps the greatest weapon was psychological. The Vikings cultivated a fearsome reputation. They arrived without warning. They showed no mercy to those who resisted. They vanished before defenders could organize. Fear traveled faster than their ships. Stories spread of berserkers, warriors who fought in a trance-like fury, seemingly immune to pain. Some said they wore bear skins and howled like animals. Whether these tales were true or exaggerated, they served their purpose. The Vikings became monsters in the minds of their victims. Yet we must be careful with this image. The monks who recorded these events were the victims. Their accounts emphasize the horror, the sacrilege, the destruction. The Vikings themselves left few written records from this early period. Their side of the story is largely silent. What we do know is that not every expedition was a raid. Alongside the warriors came traders. Alongside destruction came commerce. The Vikings established trading networks that stretched from Scandinavia to Baghdad. They traded furs, amber, and slaves. They returned with silver, silk, and spices. Violence and trade walked hand in hand. By the mid-800s, something began to change. The raiders were no longer content with quick strikes. They started to stay. The age of settlement had begun. In 865, a massive Viking force landed in England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, our main source for this period,
called it the Great Heathen Army. This was different from previous raids. This army came to conquer. For over a decade, the Great Heathen Army swept across England. One by one, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fell: Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia. Only one kingdom remained, Wessex in the south. Its young king, Alfred, faced his fight of his life. In 878, Alfred was driven into hiding. He retreated to the marshes of Somerset with a small band of followers. The Vikings controlled nearly all of England. It seemed hopeless. But Alfred refused to surrender. From his swampy refuge, he gathered forces. He planned. He waited. Then he struck. At the Battle of Idington, Alfred's army met the Viking force. After a fierce fight, the Vikings broke. Their leader, Guthrum, sued for peace. The treaty that followed divided England. The Vikings would keep the north and east in a region that became known as the Danelaw. Alfred would keep Wessex and begin the long process of reclaiming the rest. This settlement changed everything. The Vikings who stayed were no longer raiders. They became farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. They married local women. They adopted Christianity. Over generations, they became English. This pattern repeated across Europe. In France, a Viking leader named Rollo received land from the Frankish king in 911. This territory became Normandy, the land of the Northmen. The Normans, as they came to be known, would later conquer England themselves in 1066. William the Conqueror, the Norman duke who defeated the Anglo-Saxons, was a descendant of Vikings. History moves in strange circles. In Ireland, the Vikings established port cities that would become major centers of trade. Dublin, founded as a Viking settlement, grew into Ireland's largest city. Waterford, Cork, and Limerick all began as Viking trading posts. But the most remarkable settlements lay far beyond Europe. The Vikings reached Iceland around 870. Within 60 years, the island was fully settled. These colonists created one of history's most unique societies. Iceland had no king. Instead, chieftains gathered annually at a general assembly called the Althing. There they made laws, settled disputes, and managed collective affairs. The Althing, established in 930, is one of the oldest parliaments in the world. It still exists today. From Iceland, the Vikings pushed further west. Around 985, a man named Eric the Red led colonists to a large island he called Greenland. The name was partly marketing. Eric wanted settlers, and Greenland sounded more appealing than the truth. Greenland's Viking colonies would survive for nearly 500 years. They traded walrus ivory and polar bear furs with Europe. They built farms along the fjords. They established churches. But they never thrived. The harsh climate, exhalation, and limited resources slowly strangled the colonies. By the 1400s, they had vanished. Yet before they disappeared, the Greenlanders made one more leap into the unknown. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed west from Greenland. He found a land of forests and wild grapes, which he called Vinland, North America. Nearly 500 years before Columbus, the Vikings had reached the New World. Archaeological evidence proves it. At a site called Lands et Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, researchers discovered the remains of a Viking settlement: turf buildings, iron tools, bronze pins. The Vikings were there. Why did they not stay? The sagas tell us of conflicts with the native peoples, whom the Vikings called Skrælings. The small Norse colonies could not withstand the pressure. After a few years, they withdrew. North America would wait centuries for European return.
To truly understand the Vikings, we must enter their spiritual world. The Norse believed in a universe of 9 realms connected by a great tree called Yggdrasil. At the center lay Midgard, the realm of humans. Above was Asgard, home of the gods. Below lurked Hel, realm of the dead. The gods themselves were not perfect or all-powerful. They were beings of immense strength and wisdom, but they had flaws. They could be tricked, they could be killed, and they knew their fate. This is what makes Norse mythology unique. The gods know the future. They know that one day Ragnarok will come, a final battle against the forces of chaos. The giants will attack, the world serpent will rise, the wolf Fenrir will break his chains. Many gods will die, the world will burn and sink beneath the waves. But from the destruction, a new world will rise. Life will begin again. This belief in fate shaped Viking culture profoundly. Death was not the end, it was a transition. What mattered was how you lived and how you died. The greatest gods were 3. Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom, war, and poetry. He sacrificed his eye for knowledge. He hung himself on Yggdrasil for 9 days to learn the secrets of the runes. He gathered the bravest fallen warriors in his hall, Valhalla, preparing them for Ragnarok. Thor, the Thunderer, god of storms and protector of humanity. Strong, brave, and straightforward. His hammer, Mjolnir, was the deadliest weapon in existence. Common people loved Thor most. His name appears in place names across the Viking world. Freya, goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, but also of war and magic. She claimed half of all warriors slain in battle for her own hall. She was powerful and independent. These were not distant, abstract deities. The Vikings felt their presence daily. Thunder was Thor's hammer striking giants. The northern lights were reflections from the armor of the Valkyries, the warrior maidens who carried fallen heroes to Valhalla. A good harvest was a gift from Freyr, Freya's brother. Religious practice centered on sacrifice and offering. Animals were killed and their blood sprinkled on altars and participants. In times of great need, human sacrifice may have occurred, though evidence remains debated. Major festivals marked the year. Yule in midwinter was the most important. Feasting, drinking, and offerings to ensure the sun's return. But here is a crucial point. Norse religion was not organized. There were no sacred texts like the Bible or Quran, no formal priesthood. Beliefs varied from region to region, family to family. When Christianity arrived, it did not face unified resistance. Conversion happened gradually, often for political or economic reasons. A king who converted could gain powerful Christian allies. Merchants who accepted baptism could trade more easily in Christian lands. By 1100, Scandinavia was officially Christian. The old gods faded into legend and folklore. Yet they never truly died. Their stories survived in poems and sagas. Today, more people know of Thor and Odin than at any time in history. The gods found a new kind of immortality. Beyond the battles and beliefs, what was daily life like for ordinary Vikings? Most were farmers. They raised cattle, sheep, and pigs. They grew barley, oats, and rye. They fished the cold northern waters. Life followed the seasons. Spring meant planting and the birth of livestock. Summer brought long days of endless work. Autumn was harvest time. Winter forced everyone indoors around the fire.
Homes were longhouses, rectangular buildings with turf or thatched roofs supported by wooden posts. A central hearth provided heat and light. Smoke drifted up and out through holes in the roof. Families lived together in these spaces, multiple generations under one roof. Privacy was limited. Community was constant. Society divided into distinct classes. At the top were the jarls, the nobles, wealthy landowners, warriors, and leaders. They lived in great halls, hosted feasts, and commanded followers. Below them were the carls, the free farmers and craftsmen. They owned land, carried weapons, and had full legal rights. This was the majority of the population. At the bottom were the thralls, slaves, captured in raids or born into bondage. They had no rights. They were property. Slavery was central to the Viking economy. Thralls did the hardest work. They could be bought, sold, or killed by their owners. Yet the system was not entirely rigid. A thrall could sometimes earn or be granted freedom. A freed slave's children might rise in status over generations. Women in Viking society had more rights than many of their European counterparts. They could own property. They could divorce their husbands. They managed households and farms when men were away. Wealthy women held considerable power. Some, according to the sagas, even fought as warriors. The historical accuracy of shield maidens is debated, but recent archaeological discoveries suggest some women were indeed buried with weapons and military honors. Justice operated through a system of laws and assemblies. Local things or assemblies met regularly to settle disputes, make decisions, and judge crimes. Blood feuds were common. If a man was killed, his family had the right to seek vengeance. This could spiral into generations of violence. To prevent endless warfare, the law offered an alternative: compensation, weregild, man payment. Every person had a price. Kill someone, and you owed their family that price. Pay it, and the feud would end. It was harsh by modern standards, but it was a system that functioned. The Vikings also valued skills beyond fighting. Poetry was highly prized. Skalds, court poets, composed elaborate verses praising their lords. They preserved history through oral tradition. Craftsmanship reached remarkable heights. Woodcarvers decorated ships and buildings with intricate patterns. Metalworkers forged beautiful jewelry and deadly weapons. Weavers produced textiles traded across the known world. These were not simple barbarians. They were a complex, sophisticated people.
All ages end. The Viking Age was no exception. By the year 1000, the forces of change were accelerating. Christianity spread across Scandinavia. Kings converted, and their subjects followed. The church brought new ideas, new laws, and new connections to the wider Christian world. The old warrior culture did not disappear overnight, but it transformed. Kings began to see themselves as Christian monarchs, not pagan warlords. Their duty was to their realm, not just their followers. National identities strengthened. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden emerged as distinct kingdoms with defined borders. Internal conflicts gave way to centralized authority. The opportunities for raiding declined. Europe was no longer weak and divided. Kingdoms had built defenses. Armies had learned how to counter Viking tactics. The great longships still sailed, but now they carried merchants more often than raiders. Trade replaced plunder as the main source of wealth. Some historians point to specific dates to mark the end. 1066. In that single year, Viking expansion ended dramatically. Harald Hardrada,
The Norwegian king, sometimes called the last great Viking, invaded England. He was killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Just weeks later, the Norman Duke William invaded from the south. The Normans were descendants of Vikings, but they were no longer Vikings themselves. They were French in language and culture. England's fate was decided, and the Viking Age, in a sense, ended where it began, on English soil. But endings are rarely clean. Viking descendants continued to rule in various places. The Norse culture of the North Atlantic islands persisted for centuries. Scandinavian influence on language, law, and custom endured. What killed the Viking Age was not defeat in battle. It was success. The Vikings achieved what they sought. They gained wealth, land, and power. Their descendants became kings and nobles across Europe. They did not disappear. They became part of the very civilization they once terrorized. What remains of the Vikings today? Their legacy is everywhere if you know where to look. Language. Hundreds of English words come from Old Norse. Window, egg, knife, die, wrong, want. The very word they comes from the Vikings. Place names scatter across the map. Any English town ending in by or thorpe was likely a Viking settlement. York was once Jorvik. Dublin comes from the Norse Dublin. Law. The concept of trial by jury has Norse roots. So does the idea that law belongs to the people, not just the king. Exploration. The Vikings proved that the Atlantic could be crossed. They reached America. They connected distant worlds. And perhaps most importantly, they left stories. The sagas of Iceland preserved a world of heroes and gods, of voyages and adventures. These tales have inspired countless books, films, and games. Today, we are more fascinated by the Vikings than ever. Why? Perhaps because they represent something we admire. Courage in the face of the unknown, the drive to seek new horizons, the refusal to accept limits. They were flawed, they were violent, they were human. But they dared. And 1,000 years later, we remember. Thank you for watching Zodiac. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of the Vikings, please subscribe and share. Until next time, keep exploring history.